Hello everyone. In this video we will be going to read MEG03 Block 3 and the unit 3 is Gift of God, Heathcliff. So the structure of the unit is objectives, introduction, the hero, Byronic and romantic, Heathcliff judged, specular or religious, let us sum up, glossary, questions, suggested reading. I think we will avoid reading glossary, questions and suggested reading. We will keep it till let us sum up. Objectives. Heathcliff is one of the discussed characters in literature. Intensely passionate, wild and revengeful, he nevertheless forces a sympathetic response from the readers. There has been a debate on Heathcliff's status in the novel as villainous or heroic. Both these standard categories do not seem to fit Heathcliff. I have always been impressed by Heathcliff as a rebel. He consciously resists acceptability on any other terms other than his own. He will neither be good nor cultured in the way the society of his time demands. He defines his own moral universe and asserts his sharply exposed unnaturalness and hypocrisies of the social practices around him. He is potentially subversive and, in that sense, anti-heroic. In this unit, we will also discuss the notion of sin and redemption, as is understood in Christian doctrines, and evaluate how, through the character of Heathcliff, Emily Bronte intellectually engages herself with the Christian moral universe. After reading this unit, you will be able to understand why, despite Heathcliff's revengefulness, we never really condemned him on how Emily Bronte, in this sense, is helping to extend our sympathies. 3.1 Introduction. See here, wife, I was never so beaten with anything in my life. But you must e'en take it as gift of God, though it is dark almost as if it came from the devil. One late summer evening of his return from Liverpool, this is the manner in which Mr. Earnshaw introduces Heathcliff, a little boy he had found on the streets of Industrial City, to his family at Wuthering Heights. As the story unfolds, we realize the deep irony that is replete in Mr. Earnshaw's introduction. Before his departure from Liverpool, Mr. Earnshaw had asked his children what gifts he should get from them on his return. Hindley, his elder son, had asked for a fiddle, and Catherine, his daughter, who was a good rider even at the age of 6, had just asked for significantly a whip. For Nellie, the housekeeper, he had promised a pocket full of apples and pears, which made Mr. Earnshaw not only a caring father but also a compassionate master, an ideal patriarch. The gift of Mr. Earnshaw actually does not impress the family. Mrs. Earnshaw was ready to fling it out of doors, but Mr. Earnshaw's explanation that he had seen the little boy starving and houseless and as good as dumb probably strikes a chord of sympathy, and Heathcliff is washed, given clean things to wear, and allowed to sleep with the children. But Heathcliff is a thing. Hindley searches his father's pocket for a promised fiddle, and on seeing that it had been crushed to bits, he blubbered aloud. And when Catherine, understood that her father had lost the whip in attending the stranger, showed her humor by grinning and spitting at the stupid little thing. This notion is later pursued in the novel. For example, in chapter 13, Isabella writes to Nellie Dean about her disastrous marriage to Heathcliff and inquires, I beseech you to explain, if you can, what I have married, suggesting that Heathcliff to her is a creature, hardly human. Mr. Ershaw's introduction equivocates both good and devil simultaneously. To the good Christian, which Mr. Ershaw surely wanted to be, any living creature is divine in origin, but the circumstances and the condition in which he finds Heathcliff, something that completely beats him, make him associate Heathcliff with the devil. A product as well as the victim of the evil that is in the society. The fact that this gift will grow up to become the tormentor and usurper and gently a man consumed with hate and revenge will make us question if notion that human life is God's gift, if really applicable to Heathcliff. Further, if human life is at all God's gift. If we keep in mind that in the mid-19th century, Darwinian assertion of the non-divine origin of human species had ignited passionate debates between religious belief and scientific empiricism, then Heathcliff is indeed a symbolic character. Generally, it is considered that at the heart of the novel Wuthering Heights lies the tumultuous Heathcliff-Catherine relationship. Most studies of the novel discuss the two characters in unison. We have decided to study them separately. One of the reasons why we wish to do this is to study the novel by consciously distancing ourselves from the idea that there is one central relationship in the novel. Our impressions about these two important characters are formed by the subjective responses of several characters. Different characters view different things, and what and how they perceive tell us as much about themselves as about what they see. To designate something as central is essentially to prioritize it and make it more important than the others. This may prejudice and make our views biased, and we could miss out on another point of view. From Nellie's perspective, all the events in her narration seems to revolve around Heathcliff and Catherine. But from another perspective, the event could be seen as the tragic story of Edgar Linton. We could have another perspective which sees the story from, say, Hindley's perspective. Therefore, perhaps we should not look at Heathcliff-Catherine as a central relationship or what is categorized as the heart of the novel, because by doing so we may be consciously imposing a closed circular structure of periphery and centrality in the novel that consistently and consciously displaces and confronts any kind of structuring. Secondly, I think Heathcliff and Catherine have aspects to their characters that ought to be studied independent of their relationship. Particularly, Catherine's rebellion against was considered conventionally as the feminine, and Heathcliff's challenge not only to the standard definition of the heroic and villainous, but also to be religious as well as secular discourses on the divine and the non-divine. 3.2. The hero, Byronic and romantic. Significantly, Heathcliff is dark. This immediately evokes in the mind of the most readers the metaphysical ideas of dark powers, both natural and supernatural. It provides the background for Heathcliff's association with the classical Christian principle of duality, good and devil, light and darkness, good and evil. For most part of the story, Heathcliff is associated with diabolic forces which Ershaw hints in the initial introduction. He is christened Heathcliff, and that is also his surname. Heathcliff was the name of the son of Mr. Ershaw, who had died in the childhood. But Heathcliff does not have Ershaw as his surname, and this makes him both a part of as well as an outsider not only to the family but to the society in the general. an outsider or insider who will be instrumental in creating disorder and chaos and subverting the very principle and the ideals on which society functions. Heathcliff evokes both the idea of the heath, a barren, desolate landscape, and heathen, the primitive, the pagan, or the pre-Christian. His name also evokes the ragged, tantalizingly edgy geographical feature of the cliff. Comparisons with the Byronic hero, a melancholic, mysterious man, beautiful, but in the same tradition as that of romantic rebel. But unlike the typical Byronic hero, there is no masochism. Rather, we can see the shades of sadist in the Heathcliff. Byronic hero created a cult of separateness, but Heathcliff feels no need to set himself apart from the rest. The romantic hero suffers because he finds the society too crass and moribund to appreciate or even understand his creative and emotional longings. But Heathcliff's suffering is a manifestation of real loss, the death of his beloved Catherine, and he feels no urge to explain himself to anyone. His acute consciousness of the injustices perpetuated on himself is enough for him to plot the destruction of others. As Hindley's dead body is being carried out of the Wuthering Heights for burial, Heathcliff lifts Hareton, Hindley's son, and places the child on the table. Then he muttered with peculiar gusto, "Nor, my bonny lad, you are mine, and we will see if one tree won't grow as crooked as another, with the same wind to twist it." Wuthering Heights, hereafter, W.H. Heathcliff's dark color also calls into question his parentage. Is it possible that one of his parents is non-European, maybe of African or Asian origin? The 19th century imperial and colonial preoccupation with both these continents resulted in the formation of various stereotypes and codes which were used to interpret and understand the different and varied culture and society of these continents. While Africa was dark continent, Asia and the East was the Orient. Europe and white races were contrasted with African and Asian races. One of the classical polarity was that the white races represented the coolness of scientific intellect and the reason, whereas the dark races were predominantly the representative of warmth of emotion and passion and the mystery of magic and mysticism. This symbolic structure represented the West as ice, the sky, and the Father, whereas the East was the fire, earth, and the Mother. This kind of discourse provided the European intellectual of the late 18th and the 19th centuries, many who were otherwise disturbed by the colonial expansion and imperial methods, with the rather comforting idea that were things that master races could never be master of. The darkness was impenetrable, as Adela quested was to learn in the Marabar caves. So, from the Rudyard Kipling to E.M. Forster and beyond, we have a number of novelists and writers who allude to this seemingly incomprehensible and mysterious power of the dark and the warmth that is chiefly characteristic of the Orient. Is Heathcliff from the Orient? Incidentally, there is another dark tragic hero, African in origin, whose grip on white European consciousness for 4 centuries is no less powerful than Heathcliff's, Othello. You will find more Orientalism in the blocks of in the blocks on Heart of Darkness and A Passage to India. The stereotypical romantic hero who dominates much of the popular romance fiction even today is tall, dark, and handsome. Portrayed as a character who is difficult to understand and even more difficult to control and contain, he is beyond the ambition of reason and reasonableness. It is fascinating as well as dangerous to encounter such characters. Nellie, Lockwood's response toward Heathcliff in many ways is the standard and stereotyped understanding as one would expect in the romance novels. But that Heathcliff is not the impetuous and unpredictable hero of standard romance novel is made apparent by the contrast that is provided by Heathcliff's unnatural and intense bonding with Catherine and his cold, calculated and dubious relationship with the infatuated Isabella. Nellie's description of Heathcliff on his return shows his transformation from an unkempt and rude young boy to a handsome man, tall, athletic, well-formed. He has an intelligent look and his manner is dignified. It is not surprising that Isabella, a 16-year-old girl leading a protected life within the social, moral, and ethical confines of the landed aristocracy, should develop an irresistible attraction towards a mysterious outsider who was a friend of her sister-in-law. In fact, the setting is perfect for a romance or an affair to take place. Only the affair ends in disastrous result. Heathcliff, I think our neighborhood is too loud. This is actually very odd. Hawkers don't even speak, they use speakers, and this is so annoying. But anyway, we will begin. Can't really help. I think this has to be stopped for some now. I think I'll repeat again. We will begin after this noise is gone. Can't really help. Okay, let us begin again. I think I'll repeat the whole paragraph. The stereotypical romantic hero who dominates much of popular romance fiction even today is tall, dark, and handsome, portrayed as a character who is difficult to understand and even more difficult to control and contain. He is beyond the ambit of reason and reasonableness. It is fascinating as well as dangerous to encounter such characters. Nellie, Lockwood's response toward Heathcliff in many ways is the standard and stereotyped understanding as one would expect in romance novels. But that Heathcliff is not the impetuous and the unpredictable hero of a standard romance novel is made apparent by the contrast that is provided by Heathcliff's unnaturalness and intense bonding with Catherine and his cold, calculated and dubious relationship with the infatuated Isabella. Nellie's description of Heathcliff on his return shows his transformation from an unkempt rude young boy to a handsome man, tall, athletic, well-formed. He has an intelligent look and his manner is dignified. It is not surprising that Isabella, a 16-year-old girl leading a protected life within the social, moral, and ethical confines of the landed aristocracy, should develop an irresistible attraction toward a mysterious outsider who was a friend of her sister-in-law. In fact, the setting is perfect for a romance and affair to take place. Only the affair ends in disastrous results. Heathcliff himself demolishes the hero of romance in his analysis of Isabella's infatuation. He tells Nellie, "Picturing in me a hero of romance and expecting unlimited indulgences from chivalrous devotion, I can hardly regard her in the light of rational creature, so obstinately has she persisted in forming a fabulous notion of my character and acting on false impression she cherished." This is very strong indictment of the cult of the romance hero and the unrealism of it. If Heathcliff is not totally a Byronic hero, he is certainly not a romance hero. Though he seems to possess all the externally requisite qualities for it, what kind of a hero is Heathcliff? It is obvious that it is not possible to define or estimate Heathcliff within the normal moral framework of the conventional society, with its regard categories of the heroic and villainous. Even the concept of dissenting hero, as was provided by the ideology of mid-Victorian society, does not encompass Heathcliff fully. It seems Emily Bronte is trying to create a hero without any heroic qualities. The reader is told on various damnable actions that Heathcliff initiates, but at the same time the reader's sympathy is drawn towards Heathcliff, who even while he is being treated shabbily as an outcast, tells Nellie, "Nellie, make me decent. I am going to be good." The problem is that one cannot define Heathcliff as a hero or villain in moral terms. Concepts of good and bad, evil and virtue, the noble and the damnable do not seem adequate to define Heathcliff. So, Heathcliff is a character who is pitted not only against social exploitation and injustice, but also against the moral universe that society believes in and which the readers share. 3.3 Heathcliff judged secular and religious. In the novel, Heathcliff is described in varieties of ways by other characters. Mostly they are derogatory. They are the evil beast, the unclaimed creature, uncivilized, without refinement, an arid wilderness of furze and whinstone, naughty swearing boy, sullen patient child, hardened to ill treatment, Judas, traitor, deliberate deceiver, black villain, monster, ungrateful brute, low ruffian, blackguard, eyes that are clouded widows of hell, incarnate goblin, and fiend. If an analysis of these descriptive terms is made, we will recognize that most of them are to do with Heathcliff being uncivilized and socially unacceptable. The other terms are moral censors that emerge from Christian beliefs. Heathcliff's socially unacceptable behavior can be explained from the number of perspectives. Psychologically, we may see him as a traumatized child who grows up feeling neglected and bullied. A deeply hurt psyche, which on adulthood seeks not only revenge but is obsessed in an infantile way with the object of his love. Frustrated in love, he unleashes hatred. Heathcliff has a fractured psyche, and the strange circumstances of his childhood makes his adult personality deformed and perverse. He is also the third angle to the love triangle of Catherine, Edgar, and himself. He is deprived of his love not because he is rejected by Catherine, but because he lacks social status and sanction, and this is something he rebels against with vengeance. In spite of the fact that Catherine chooses to marry Edgar, he knows that it is he whom she loves, because the factor that prompted her choice had nothing to do with their love. Heathcliff's behavior can be explained sociologically if we consider the kind of injustices that are perpetuated on him. I'll read this again. Heathcliff's behavior can be explained sociologically if we consider the kind of injustices that are perpetuated on him. By birth, he is on the social outcast for no fault of his. Catherine is accepted at the Grange, but Heathcliff is not. In the Earnshaw household, he is repeatedly demeaned and wronged. As a child, no one except Mr. Earnshaw protected him against Hindley's hatred, which was often violent. It can be argued that such victimization would beget violence of the kind that Heathcliff uses as an adult. Social oppression was tolerated by the sullen patient child, who was hardened perhaps due to ill treatment, and could stand Hindley's blow without winking or shedding a tear. When Heathcliff wreaks his revenge, it is the pent-up anger of past injustices that makes him do what he does. The society does not accept such individualized retribution, and our narrator, Nellie, does not approve of it. The artificiality of the civilized world, as represented in the well-nurtured potted plants and flowers at the Grange, is contrasted with the wild naturalness of the moors where Heathcliff and Catherine can abandon themselves, liberated from the oppressiveness of the same artificial and the structured civilized society. The judgment against Heathcliff, which emerged from Christian mythography of the beast and the fiend, of the devil and Judas, are, I think, more problematic. Heaven, hell, sin, purgatory, redemption, death, and afterlife are important aspects in the novel. Time and again, Heathcliff is associated with hell. He seems to have come from the depths of hell, and his destination also seemed to be hell. Fire and burning are also associated with Heathcliff to suggest the tortures of hell. As a newly married wife, Isabella's opinion about her husband, as expressed in her letter to Nellie, makes him out more like an unworldly evil beast than just a cruel man. What position does Heathcliff have in Christian moral scheme? Is he a Judas whom has been betrayed? What are Emily Bronte's views on the matter? A detailed biographical study of the religious influences on Bronte is provided by Tom Winifred in the book The Brontes and Their Background, Romance and Reality. In chapter titled Heaven and Hell and the Brontes' Religion, Winifred traces the influence of Calvinism, Methodism, and evangelical ideas on the Brontes, and also how they consciously challenged and dissented from these influences. The Victorian society, fractured by increasing economic disparity between various economic classes, was plagued by poverty, disease, and death. The urban slums were regularly visited with cholera, tuberculosis, and many people died. With poverty, there was a rise in crime, alcoholism, prostitution. These essentially political and social concerns were given religious significance. Suffering, damnation, salvation were ideas that became both relevant and urgent from the point of view of theological debate. The main issue seemed to be to explain the lot of human beings on earth. Was suffering a kind of preordained punishment for the sin committed? Did suffering ensure salvation? Who was worthy of heaven and who was to be condemned of hell? The majority of books that Bronte possessed were theological in nature. Mr. Bronte was a man who had strong faith in the Church of England, and Brontes derived their religious influence from many sermons, conversation and argument that must have been part of their life at home. Mrs. Branwell, the aunt, was a Methodist. When Branwell, the Bronte brother, was dismissed from the service by Reverend Mr. Robinson in 1845, it came as a blow to the family. Branwell had shown great academic and literary promise, and his going first to London and then his employment as a tutor at Thorpe Green was seen as the beginning of a promising career. But it all ended in a disaster, partly because of Branwell's alcoholism and mainly because of Branwell was unable to face up the reality of his life. The next 3 years saw the steep moral and physical decline of the young man. Branwell's fall had a deep effect on his sisters, who were sympathetic to him. They watched with horror, helplessness, as their brother wallowed in self-pity and degradation. What kind of punishment was this? What was Branwell's sin? Could he be saved? It was not easy to make a moral judgment, and none of the Christian doctrines of Methodism, which concerned itself with salvation through the faith, or the evangelicals who believed in the salvation through work, provided any answer to this tragic or personal problem. Growing up as daughters of clergymen, the Bronte sisters were certainly exposed to a lot of religious ideas. Human actions in life, its moral judgment, and the resulting punishment or the reward were thoughts that must have been deeply thought about by intellectually alert sisters. Emily Bronte's view on these matters can be guessed from the statement she makes in an essay she wrote. God is the God of justice and mercy. Then, assuredly, each pain that he inflicts on his creatures, be they human or animal, rational or irrational, each suffering of our unhappy nature is only a seed for that divine harvest which will be gathered when sin, having spent its last drop of poison, death having thrown its last dart, both will expire on the funeral pyre of universe in flame, and will leave their former victims to an eternal realm of happiness and glory. Winifred suggests that Emily's religious beliefs may be seen as following sets of axioms. Hell exists only on earth, and no soul suffers torment after death. A soul that has suffered sufficiently on earth attains its heaven. A soul that has not suffered in limbo for a time but is redeemed by other sufferings, if not by its own. Emily Bronte was able to move away from conventional theological beliefs of heaven and hell, salvation and damnation, to the human condition as it was in life on earth. She understood human suffering with greater understanding and sympathy. The struggles and pains of this life were not to be carried on after death or into the next life. Sin and evil must spend itself completely here on earth and in life. For after death there is no sin and no evil. There is only happiness and glory. Heathcliff's hell is on earth and he suffers sufficiently. After his death, it seems all hatred was spent itself. A quiet peace descends on Wuthering Heights. When Lockwood visits his grave, there is a bending sky, fluttering of moths around the heath, the soft wind breathing through the grass. The storm and the soul's torment is over, and Lockwood ponders how one could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth. One can safely guess that sleepers in the quiet earth do not have unquiet slumbers. For Wuthering Heights has now been overwhelmed by the fragrance of stalks and wallflowers. While Hareton and Kathy kisses each other before they go out for a walk on the moors are no longer inhospitable. Just before his death, Heathcliff has a rather interesting conversation with Nellie about the repentance, happiness, and salvation. Let us mark some pieces of the conversation. Heathcliff: but you might as well bid a man struggling in water rest within arm's length of shore. I must reach it first, and then I'll rest, as repenting of my injustices. I have done no injustice, and I repent of nothing. I am too happy, and yet I am not happy enough. My soul's bliss kills my body, but does not satisfy itself. Nelly: you are aware, Mr. Heathcliff, that from the time you were 13 years old, you have lived a selfish, unchristian life, and probably hardly had a Bible in your hands. During all that period, how far you have erred from its precepts, and how unfit you will be for its heaven, unless a change takes place before you die. Heathcliff: I tell you, I have already attained my heaven, and that of others is altogether unvalued and uncoveted by me. Nelly's views about death are conventional and emerge from Christian beliefs of repentance leading to salvation. But from Heathcliff, there is no need of repentance, as he feels he has already attained heaven. One may interpret that as death uniting Heathcliff finally and eternally to his beloved Catherine, but it could also mean that Heathcliff has been purged of all the evil and sin, and that beyond death he will suffer no more, nor will he inflict any suffering. We may argue that Emily Bronte's theological belief of suffering leading to salvation is essentially Calvinistic and masochistic. But often this suffering is not for one's own self but for other. Also, with the rejection of Christian notions of promised heaven and the threat of hell, Emily was, through her characters, defining a sympathetic understanding about human suffering and its relation to the class prejudice, greed, property, and money. Before the arrival of Heathcliff, the Wuthering Heights is a place where everyone seems to be happy and quite unaware of the world outside. With Heathcliff's introduction, it would seem as if the suffering and the torment of the outside world has been introduced into the hitherto secluded world. It seems to me that Emily's consciousness of injustice of the social world make her view life with certain sadness. All suffer. There is no escape. Significantly, Catherine complains about Edgar. What, in the name of all he feels, has he to do with the books when I am dying? The dying here is both literal as well as symbolic of suffering. There can be no philosophical resignation. The books do come back, and at the end of the novel, when Kathy is teaching Hareton how to read, but by then everybody has suffered enough. Let us sum up. Early critical evaluation of Wuthering Heights in general explained Heathcliff's character in metaphysical terms highlighting the Gothic fascination with evil and romantic urge toward isolation and self-destruction. Uncomfortable question about social and economic justice perpetuated on Heathcliff, his origin and parentage, as well as the powerful contrast he presented to the rather structured and oppressive patriarchy as represented by Thrushcross Grange, were sidelined to the view that Wuthering Heights was in tune with Shakespearean tragedies, and that Emily Bronte might have been Shakespeare's younger sister. In the poetic way, she fascinates the imagination with the fresh, dark air of tragic passion. In this sense, Heathcliff was not seen as a disruptor or even a dissenter or rebel, only as a primitive, uncontrolled, and pure form of energy that has been unleashed with tragic consequences. Some critics admired him for this energy and vitality, and some agreed with Catherine's observation that Heathcliff is a fierce, pitiless, wolfish man, a bird of a bad omen, and the concentrates of the injustices he perpetuates on his victims. Later critics contextualized the text with the historical and biographical frameworks and worked out a rationale for Heathcliff's behavior. A more sympathetic and realistic appraisal of Heathcliff was made from social and cultural analysis as well as psychological insights. Studies from the theological angle were also made. Heathcliff can be seen from purely realistic position, but he can also be seen as unreal and non-human. That is not to dismiss him as the devil's agent, but to state that such a character is not possible as normal part of everyday reality, but rather as symbolic of the elemental. Nevertheless, it may be prudent not to strive forward a unified singular understanding of Heathcliff, or, for that matter, any character in the novel. That was precisely the author's intention. The fact that all explanations to explain Heathcliff remain inadequate need to be seen as a sign of weakness. But on the contrary, that is the novel's strength, that it provides space for many interpretations and perspectives. By not conforming to any set of patterns of ideas or structures or belief, by not seeking the one ultimate truth about Heathcliff, it is possible to be closer to many truths. And by this we have ended the reading of Unit 3 from Block 3 of MEG03. MEG3 is the British novel and Block 3 covers the Wuthering Heights, and we were reading a part of that Block 3, which is Unit 3, The Gift of God, the Heathcliff. In the next unit, we will be covering You Look Like a Lady Now, Significance of Catherine. That is Unit 4. Till then, bye.